Hi everyone, today we're going to talk about solving absolute value equations. I'm going to go through a couple of different examples. I want you to make sure that you write this down. So if you haven't printed off the note sheet yet, stop the video, print it off, and I want you to follow along. That way you have these examples in front of you when you do the assignment, okay? Okay, when you are solving absolute value inequalities, there are a series of steps that if you follow them every single time, you will always get the problem right. It's very straightforward. You just have to follow the steps in this order, okay? The first thing you're going to do is make sure that you have the absolute value by itself on one side of the inequality. So right now I do. I have the absolute value of 2x plus 7 is less than 9, so that's all by itself. From here, you are going to set up two inequalities, okay? You're going to set up two. The first one, you're just going to take it out of the absolute value symbols and leave everything else the same. So I just have 2x plus 7 is less than 9. The other inequality is you take it out of the absolute value symbols, you flip the inequality, and you negate the other side, meaning you change the sign. So positive 9 becomes negative 9, the less than became a greater than. Those are your two inequalities. So the first one, take it out of the absolute value symbol, leave everything else the same. And the second one, take it out of the absolute value symbol, flip the sign, and change the sign. So flip the inequality and then negate the other side. So make it, if it was positive, make it a negative. Now you have two inequalities that you're going to solve. So if I solve this one, I'm just subtracting 7 from both sides. I have 2x is less than 2, divide by 2, and we end up with x is less than 1. Over here on the right, if I subtract 7 from both sides, I end up with 2x is greater than negative 16. Negative 9 and negative 7 gives you negative 16. Divide by 2, and I end up with x is greater than negative 8. Now, I'm going to go ahead and graph my solution. Okay, I don't need anything fancy on your number line. Literally just put these two numbers on your number line. So I know negative 8 is over here. I know that 1 is here. Okay, if I am, I'll do this in pink. X is less than 1, that means I have an open circle at 1 and I'm going less than. Notice I'm not filling in any arrows or anything, okay? Over here, I have x is greater than negative 8, so I have an open circle at negative 8 and I'm going greater than. So what you see is that you're filling in between those two values. So if you were to write your answer, you can write this as one compound inequality. Negative 8 is less than x is less than 1. And that is your answer. Okay, so again, set up your two inequalities, solve them separately, graph them on the same number line, and then write out your solution. Okay, those are the steps that you're going to follow. Let's go ahead and look at example number 2. Now this is a little bit different. This one has a greater than symbol in it. That one had a less than symbol in it. Before I go on to problem number 2 though, I want to tell you a little story. I'm going to tell you a story about this hockey player. He is one of the most famous hockey players ever. His name is Bobby Orr. O-R-R is how you spell his last name. Right? He was a Boston Bruin, so if you go to Boston, you ask who the greatest hockey player was, they'll say, nobody's greater than Bobby Orr. Right? That's what they say. Nobody's greater than Bobby Orr. Now there's a reason I'm telling you this. You'll see it in a second. Okay, let's look at the second problem. Problem number 2. I'm going to set it up just like I did with problem number 1. I'm going to set up two inequalities. Right, so I've got I have my absolute value all by itself. So I'm going to set up my two inequalities. I've got 5x minus 3. take it out of the absolute value, leave everything else the same. And for my second inequality, take it out of the absolute value, flip the inequality, and change the sign. Okay, now I'm going to solve these two inequalities. So the one on the left, I'm going to add 3 to both sides. I end up with 5x is greater than or equal to 10. And then I'm just going to divide both sides by 5, and I get x is greater than or equal to 2. Over here, when I add 3 to both sides, I end up with 5x is less than or equal to -4. -7 plus 3 is -4. Divide both sides by 5, and I end up with x is less than or equal to -4/5. It's totally fine that there's a fraction there. Okay, if I were to set up my number line, again, I don't need anything fancy, just put these two values on your number line. So -4/5 would go over here because it's smaller than 2. 2 would be over here. Okay, I'm saying x is greater than or equal to 2. That means I have a closed circle at 2. Because it's greater than or equal to, I'm shading to the right. X is less than or equal to -4/5. That means I have a closed circle and it's less than, so I'm shading to the left. When my two arrows go away from each other, I have to have an or in my answer. So my answer here is x is less than or equal to -4/5, or x is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, are you ready? What did I just say here? I said nobody is greater than Bobby Orr. Yeah? Go back here. Look at this for a second. This is a greater than symbol. You have an or in your answer. Nobody is greater than Bobby Orr. Okay? Whenever you do an absolute value inequality and it starts off with a greater than or a greater than or equal to symbol, you have to have or in your answer. Nobody is greater than Bobby Orr. Don't forget it. That's going to help you to remember. When it's less than in the original problem, you're shading between. You get this compound inequality with the between. The x is between the two values. When you have a greater than, you have an or in your answer and you're shading away. Okay, let's do the other two example problems. Now, in this first problem here, problem number 3, notice that my absolute value is not by itself yet. I have to get it by itself, so the first thing I have to do is subtract 4. Before I set up my two inequalities, I have to get that inequality by itself. So I have the absolute value of 3x is less than or equal to 24. Now I can set up my two inequalities. First one, take it out of the absolute value, leave everything else the same. In the second one, take it out of the absolute value, flip the inequality, and change the sign of the other side. Now you can solve this. Divide by 3. Here I end up with x is less than or equal to 8. Over here when I divide by 3, I get x is greater than or equal to -8. You go ahead and do your number line. Here's -8. Here's +8. I am greater than or equal to -8, so I have a closed circle at -8. I'm going this way. I'm less than or equal to +8, so I have a closed circle here. And I'm going this way. And there you go. So if I write it out, I have -x is less than or excuse me, -8 is less than or equal to x is less than or equal to 8. And that is my answer. Okay, again, this was a less than or equal to symbol, and I shaded between. Now you look at this one, you say, oh dear, there's a greater than symbol that tells me I have to have an or in my answer. Why? Because nobody is greater than Bobby Orr. Okay, so here we go. I have to get that absolute value by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And so that leaves me with the absolute value of x plus 1 is less than 9. Now that I have the absolute value by itself, now I can set up my 2 inequalities. My first inequality, I'm going to take it out of the absolute value and leave everything else the same. The second one, I'm going to take it out of the absolute value, flip my sign, and change it to a negative on the other side. Now we're just going to solve our 2 inequalities. So subtract 1 from both sides. Here I get x is greater than 8. Here when I subtract 1 from both sides, I get x is less than negative 10. Here's my number line. Again, nothing fancy. Negative 10 is smaller than 8, so I'm going to put negative 10 on the left. I'll put 8 on the right. I have an open circle. X is greater than 8, so I shade to the right. I have an open circle at negative 10, and x is less than negative 10, so I shade to the left. I shaded away because I have a greater than, and nobody is greater than Bobby or, so I have an or in my answer. I have x is less than negative 10, or x is greater than 8. Why? Because nobody is greater than Bobby or. Okay, and that is your answer. So on your assignment, make sure that you show all this work, make sure that you graph it, and make sure you put this final answer on here. It's not correct unless you don't have this boxed in part. You have to make sure you do that last part. Hopefully this video helps you out. Again, if you need to watch it again just to be sure, please feel free to do that. Make sure that you wrote down everything and you can use these problems to model when you're doing the homework. There are a couple of problems on the homework where they don't look exactly like this, but again, remember you want to isolate the absolute value. So for example, if you have a problem that is similar to this, the absolute value of x plus 1 minus 7 is greater than 10. Okay, you still need to isolate that absolute value first. So add 7 to both sides before you do anything else. Then you have the absolute value of x plus 1 is greater than 17. Now you can go ahead and set up your 2 inequalities. Okay, always get that absolute value by itself first. Okay, that's what I have for you guys today. Hopefully this helps, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.